Hello, distinguished guests and friends. We're very much pleased to have you all here at Columbia Global Center's Beijing, both in person and online, for this important discussion on preparing Chinese American-bound university students for race relations. So the center, the space you're now at, is the only official administration in China of Columbia University. As you just watched in the video, it is the mission of the center is to facilitate and promote the meaningful and impactful exchange and collaboration of the university with its Chinese counterparts. So today's conversation is a very critical one. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, violence and harassment towards the Asian American, Pacific Islander, as well as African American has spiked. Most of us have watched the deeply troubling headline as events like the mass shooting in Atlanta and other attacks, against the Asian America and AAPI the community. And according to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, in 2020, the reported incident of hate crime has increased by 150%. And almost certainly many more has gone unreported or have not been categorized as hate crime. Well, on the other hand, many most Chinese high school students has grown up and come of age as part of the majority in the relatively racial homogeneous society. Race may not have been an important maker of their identity or have not been factored into their identity too much. However, not only are these students will be a minority when they reach the US, but also they are like walking into a hotbed of the racial tension of the different races of local students and citizens. So therefore, as part of the Columbia University-wide initiative titled Stand in Solidarity, Combating Racism and Xenophobia, today we will focus on useful action plan and resources that can prepare the international student to better accommodate the racialized environment of US as a minority. So now I'm very honored to introduce today's panel of incredible scholars and experts. So my introduction will be very brief so that we can save time for the important discussion and exchange with our audience. But please know that their full bios are available on the Columbia Global Center's website and WeChat. So the first one is Emerson R. Miller, who is a Columbia alumni and now the Director of International Outreach, International Department at Beijing 101 High School. Welcome, Emerson. The second one is also a very great scholar, Dr. Justin Patch. Here, okay. Hello. Okay, he is assistant professor of music at Vassar College. Special thanks to Justin, who joined us at a very late night or very early morning in New York time to share his first-hand experience, observation, very insightful knowledge about this topic. And second one is the third one is our student representative, Lei Sloan. She just completed her undergrad study at Columbia Engineering School, and now in the fall will pursue her master degree study in business analytics at Columbia Engineering. Welcome, Lacey. And the last one is definitely a great academic moderator for today's discussion, Angela Curry. She is Center Principal of AP at RDFZ ICC Beijing. Welcome, Angela. Thank you so much for joining us. So now I will turn the stage to the terrific panel and hand the microphone to our moderator to start the discussion. Thank you.
I'm very excited to be a part of this discussion today. And thank you for joining us, both in person and online. You did wonderful introductions. When I was asked to do this discussion, I thought this is great because in my daily life, my job is to send excellent students to study in the United States, which is my country. And as we've just heard some of the background and the statistics of current increased attacks on Asian Americans in the United States, But as you know, the United States has a very, very complex history with race. We can look back to the founding of the United States on slavery. We can look back to the civil rights movement. We can look back to internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War, and it is ongoing and ongoing. It's never been resolved, and it just shifts its focus. We can remember after 9/11, when the attacks on anyone even resembling someone that was Arab, maybe they were from India, and the violence in those cases. And I know currently, because of the pandemic and the xenophobia, the fear, it is exacerbated by a 24-hour news cycle that feeds into it and makes it worse. And instead of seeking to build bridges and to learn and to connect and have common understanding, it seems to be going in the other direction. So when I was asked to participate in this discussion today, as someone who wants to be a part of moving it in the right direction, I was very pleased to accept the invitation, and I'm grateful for that. And to have this discussion with people in the United States, as Justin is, and here on the ground and direct experience. I hope we can come to some really good ways to move forward and actionable solutions that I can take back to my school and share with my colleagues, and how to improve this situation and prepare the students that we adore and value and moving forward in their learning journeys in the United States. So I'm going to ask Emerson, first of all, and I'm going to kind of open it up. As we know, on May 25th in 2020, we all watched a horrific incident take place where a police officer murdered an African-American man and was filmed. And these events are very similar in racial targeting of people. And I want to ask you on a personal level, how you connect your experience as an African-American male to the experience of Asians that will also encounter this type of very traumatic racism.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you, Helena, for putting this together. I'm really honored to be here. It's a very important topic, an important issue that all of us really need to come to terms with. And I'm great to be back here at Columbia University, my alma mater, and to participate in today's event. I think your question is an important one, Angela. Personally, I have to think about race every day. Every time I look in the mirror, I think about race because I know I'm going out into a world where I'm a minority. In China, I'm a minority within a minority. So I have to think about that as well. And I think that has equipped me well to impart wisdom and experience on my Chinese students who will one day go into a world where they will be a racial minority. And the best thing that I can tell them, that I often tell them, is to be proud of who you are, to understand where you come from, and have the ability to express yourself. And the best thing that I can do for my students is to create an environment for them where they can learn how to express themselves in English, the international language, place where they're going to need to be able to speak and effectively communicate. Because most problems can be resolved through effective communication. And when there's a breakdown in communication, that's generally when you see these types of conflicts rise. So there are a lot of things that we're going to get into today. And I do feel a connection with my students being a minority. But the thing that I would always impress upon them most is the ability to communicate themselves, express themselves effectively.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think communication is very important. And I want to express though that I think there really is a communication breakdown. And for some reason, there's fear. And I think because of the pandemic, which is a very frightening time that we all live in, and it originating in China, where I've been this entire time. So I've had that perspective. But I want to ask Justin in the United States, do you see that people are blaming China for this? And do you see any of that direct connection from your perspective in the United States through this process?
Sorry about that. So the short answer is yes. I mean, I think there's been a lot of anger. There's been a lot of blame that's been put around. And there are folks of Asian descent that I know who live in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area who have had people sort of say rather unfortunate things to them about, them bringing COVID and whatnot, even though most of them were born and raised in New York and have never lived in China, that sort of thing. So, but I think a lot of it has to do with where you are, right? I mean, the media market that you're in actually does matter a great deal. And, I will say that, and I feel bad saying this, but I think there is some truth to it. Like, there's a difference between being in the metro New York area and being in the metro Kansas City area, right? These things do matter. And there is a certain comfort that you can have in, the urban East and West Coast that maybe if you were in the Southeast or in the Southwest or the upper Midwest would not be the same. So, and I do think that a lot of the rhetoric around COVID, not so much now, but a year ago, was very much centered on China. And the repercussions of that rhetoric were very readily apparent.
So just a personal anecdote from my side. I'm from the South, I'm from Texas, and I have had a family member tell me, do not return to the United States. No one wants me there because now I'm in communist China. When I left the United States 11 years ago to move to the Middle East, they hated the Arabs. So I feel like it's following me. This wherever I go, that's who they choose to hate. And I mean, not to make light of it, but I do want to try to understand a little bit why this is the case, why the fear. We know when we meet people, and even my same family members, they would never just be hateful to someone, yet they can collectively target a group of minorities, whichever group that is for the current circumstance, and very actively blame them for the ill in the world. And there's something I want to know, and maybe I'll ask Lacey to speak to this, viewing it from the outside, that what is the cause of this? I think understanding the underlying causes would really help our students know what they're going to grapple with when they do transition to living in the United States.
I think a very important thing for this question is that a lot of time we look at the surface and don't really get to understand the culture and the history of other races or other people's cultures, so that we just look at the surface and start our hatredism. And I think for students, and especially a student in the international department, and it's really important for them to get to know more about other countries' history and also other race history. I think from my personal experience, it is really great for me to get to know a lot of European history and American history when I was in high school, because before that I didn't get a chance to know that much about US history we only focus on Chinese history and also like East Asian history, but to get to read more literature on a lot of social issues and about like United States history is really helpful for me.
So do you feel a sense of optimism about the future of these relationships, or do you feel it's escalating and getting worse? And I'm going to leave that question for everyone on the panel.
For me, I'll say I'm really optimistic because I believe as time goes by, people will start to communicate deeper and try their best to get to know each other. So I think, I'll be optimistic for this one.
Yes, I agree with Lacey. I too am optimistic about the future of race relations, primarily because I see the future here. We see the future every day. And I know the type of students who are going abroad. And I know I'm going to come back to it, I know they do have the ability to communicate. Perfect example, sitting right here. I've known Lacey since she was a bright-eyed 14-year-old girl. And to see her grow into the mature, intelligent young woman that she is today, and to be able to come back and be a colleague of mine on a panel, is amazing. That gives me nothing but hope and optimism. And for the reasons she said, because she's well-read, because she understands the history of the place where she's going, she has the ability to protect herself, but also to be an ambassador. And that's what all of these young people are. All of them are ambassadors, not government ambassadors, not necessarily diplomatic ambassadors, but you're ambassadors of yourself, of your family, of your school, of your culture. You represent that. If you can represent it well, you will get the respect of the people wherever you go. That will happen. So I definitely am optimistic, and I definitely believe that the goodness in people will prevail. I think history does teach us that.
Great. Justin, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Lacey and Emerson 100%, and I think, you know, to some extent, some of the ugly things that we've seen in the last year have brought really important histories to light, right? So there was an article written about 10 years ago by Ta-Nehisi Coates about the case for reparations. And one of the things he brings up is that Black folks were excluded from the New Deal. So the thing that was meant to expand the middle class, Black soldiers were exempted from the GI Bill. So the thing that was supposed to get young men who served in the armed forces into the middle class, they were excluded from. Like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Yellow Peril, you know, we sort of learn about the Trail of Tears, but we don't learn about all the other ways in which, you know, indigenous folks have been excluded from paths of upward mobility. And I think all of these histories are beginning to come out now in a way that's changing how people think. It's changing how they think about education. It's changing the way they think about stuff like housing and affordable housing and zoning laws and all of these little things, the way we think about banking and making finance available. And all of this is the way in which we try to repair our communities, the way that we try to repair our educational systems, the way that we try to help kids stay whole through schooling and through higher education, the way we think about trying to move talented young people into the middle class. Like all of these things are becoming topics that are talked about in the news, on TV, on the radio, written about in newspapers, talked about on podcasts. And I think all of this information is making people think differently about how we should construct society and how we should think about people that we've never seen face to face. And that's a giant step forward.
And you touch on a really important point that I want to address, which is policy. And I think when we look at the history of the United States, and as Lacey had mentioned, learning about its history and the policy is fraught with problems of institutional racism. And something has happened in the last 5 years that I think is a shift. It's as if it's been exposed for what it is. that we can no longer just sweep it under the rug. So that it's been unveiled and it's been hurtful and it's been painful in a lot of ways. But we can't get to that healing part until we do expose the problems for what they are. And the fact that we even have the term hate crime in the United States is about policy. It's a shift in laws that make it absolutely, collectively not okay to target people for their race, ethnicity, gender, and so on and so forth. And we see it happening, but it's being defined for exactly what it is because of policy. And I agree with all the panelists about being optimistic. Because we now have safeguards in place, we have the conversation. We also have a very, very rapidly changing demographic in the United States. And it's incredibly diverse. And it's really is my favorite thing about my country, but I think it's also just stewing and breeding this issue, and it's coming to the surface. And I think there's going to be a good result over time. But right now, the students that we are sending to study in the United States are literally jumping into a viper pit with the issue the way it is now. I have currently, because of my job is to send students to the United States to study, but I have 19 of my own students that I'm very, very close to, and 15 of them are about to leave for the United States. So I think to myself, how are they going to be okay? I worry about them because they're my children now, and I care deeply about their well-being when they get there. I don't want them to go to the United States and just have Chinese friends and just live in that isolated way, because it will be a comfort zone. So I kind of want to shift the conversation now to what strategies do we have to help them? And I don't want to use the word integrate because I think that's a misnomer, to help them maximize their experience and be who they are and within that experience. And I really worked hard at teaching them to communicate, as Lacey had brought up, and as Emerson had said about the language. That has been my primary focus, and they're excellent at it. I have no doubt they can do that. I would hope that the universities that receive them have policies in place, and I trust that they do. They're very good schools. But I want to know, what can we do here now in the time that I have to prepare them? And I think it's an important question, not just for teachers and educators and school administrators and students, but also for parents. And how can we work together to make sure they're safe and that they feel confident in the experience they're going to have. It should be the best time of their life. And yet we're all concerned about that. So Emerson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a critical question. And to be frank, I think it's very difficult because I don't think there's a lot that we can do beyond here. So for example, once they go there, they're going to have to rely heavily on their background. They're going to have to rely heavily on their own personality. They're going to have to do things on their own. There's no silver bullet. But I think one of the things that we can do as educators and people in international departments or international schools, parents, we can try to help to create an environment where students are somewhat prepared and they know what to expect. And one of the most important things I think we can do is not to let them feel fear. So what's happening here, this is what we need to be doing. We don't want you guys to be scared. We want you guys to be excited about where you're going, because there are so many great things there. And you're going to hear people talking about the bad things. You're going to see the negative things on the news. But the vast majority of people that you meet, they're going to welcome you. They're going to be interested in you. They're going to want to know what your life is like. And if you're scared and you're nervous, you're worried about everybody that you see that's different than you, you're going to hold back. So the best thing that we can do is don't fear. Don't worry so much about the things that you see in the news. Understand them, but don't worry so much about it. You know, Justin brought up, we talked a little bit about policy, and Justin brought up the Immigration Act of 1882, also known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, which, you know, if you read the text of it, it's very, very disappointing. I often have my students, because I teach history, I have them read that text. And it's disturbing to know that there were people who wanted to exclude Chinese people because they were Chinese. That's disturbing to know that that's part of American history. But also, even at that time, there were people who were advocating for Chinese inclusion as well. Frederick Douglass gave a speech in 1869, a very famous speech, in which he talked and argued for the American composite, for actually embracing immigration from China and other places in the world. So historically, there have always been people who have advocated for inclusion and understood the brotherhood and the sisterhood of humanity from way back. And there are people like that today. I think what we're doing here is a testament to that. So we want to inform, but we do not want to scare you. We want to encourage you to embrace what's in front of you, because it's so important. And like Angela said, this should be the time of your life. I wish I could go back to this time.
So, and I think if anyone can really speak to the experience, it's got to be Lacey. And advising us as educators and parents and students going abroad, what are the things we should be doing right now to really prepare the students?
I think a great thing is to help students build their interest, to help them to have more hobbies and things like that, because in college it's not only about studies, especially for like Chinese students. I think it is great to let them to get to know more different types of sports, or go to see more literature or movies about other countries' history. And then when they're at college, they have a lot of interest to communicate with other students. And just like Anderson said, don't be afraid. You have to speak up to get to know new people and to join clubs or sports teams to meet new friends and to communicate with them. I think for me at 101 ID, I get to play frisbee with my teachers, and also watch them play rugby and football. And I think that really helped me to have more conversation with my classmates from other countries, not only in the States.
So I think that those are very, very good points. And working at an international curriculum center here in Beijing, we have a big focus on international mindedness and inclusivity. So our staff is maybe from 21 countries. And we're always trying to share different cultural festivals and food and ways of being and understanding a very diverse world. But China is very Chinese, and it's not like my country. People aren't used to being different. I know there's a lot of differences amongst all of the Chinese individuals, of course, but it's when you go to the United States specifically, you are now part of a group that's very, very identified. And I'm going to ask Justin, who's in the United States right now, what that looks like on the ground and how we can better prepare our students to adjust to that sort of circumstance and maybe kind of dilute that circumstance a little better and make it more inclusive.
Well, so I want to try to connect the answer to this to what Emerson and Lacey were talking about. I think if you're a Chinese student coming to a university, you are not the first Chinese person that most of the people that you will meet have ever met. Right? There are plenty of Asians in America, and there's a good chance that the students you're going to meet have met someone else who's Chinese. And the other thing is, if you are nervous that, you know, your English isn't perfect and you have an accent, most of us in the States have grown up around people for whom English was not their first language for most of our lives. And so I find my students here are very, very, you know, accustomed to their friends who are from Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, China, India, who have accents. It's not a big issue, right? So I think that overcoming those fears of difference are really, really important to letting you just be free to be yourself when you get to college. Like that much is something that just know that you're not, like, yes, you are different, but you're not so different that your peers can't find commonality with you. Right? I always think that, like, for young folks from China who are going to America, you have a lot in common with students in America, right? There is a lot of commonality. We live in a very interconnected world. And I think those commonalities matter a lot more than the differences, right? I think that's the thing that I think is an important mindset to have just going into this transition, just for starters. Thinking about making the adjustment. Life is different in America for a whole bunch of reasons, right? And some of them have to do with, you know, macro cultural issues, and some of them just have to do with going to college is just a transition for everybody. Right? Your freshman year in college, I don't care if you grew up down the street from the college you're going to, or you traveled halfway around the world, your first year in college is going to be an adjustment. And so the difference that you feel going into a college for the first time is likely similar to what your peers who are American born and raised are feeling. Right? Everybody who's 18 or 19 who's going to college feels a certain amount of anxiety about being different. And so I think some of it is just realizing that, yes, you are different, but everybody who's coming in is feeling that same sense. Right? So that these feelings that you're going through, everybody got them.
Well, and I think reaching out and having those communication skills is really essential. Something at our school that we really try to focus on is problem-solving skills. Talk about it. Don't just hide it inside yourself. And being solution-oriented as an individual, regardless of your situation or culture, I think it's excellent skills. And I agree with Justin. I mean, these are, you're going to be transitioning and have more in common with people than you have not in But I want to shift a little bit the conversation about safety. And I know as a parent, that must be the number one concern. And even taking away the issues of race, the political undertones that are happening in the United States, the issues around the pandemic, so on and so forth, even in the best of circumstances, you gotta worry about your safety a little bit differently when you get to the United States than you do here in China. I have to remind myself. There's a difference there, and it's not really good in a lot of ways in the U.S. So I want to ask Lacey to talk about when you went to the United States, did you recognize, oh my gosh, I don't feel safe? Did you have strategies in place? Were you warned in advance? How did that happen for you?
When I first went to the United States for my college study, I was in Connecticut at Boston University, and that's really different from New York. And at Connecticut, because we have a campus, and for international students who first got there, we have the orientation, and the public safety told us if you feel unsafe, you can ask them to walk you back to your dorm. But also, if you have late class, I always go back to dorm with my friends. And I think, and when I moved to New York, things got a lot different because I have to take the subway, I may take the Uber, and I need to go shopping. And and so when I'm at New York, if I call a Uber, I'll share my trip with my friends. Or sometimes if it's late, I'll share that with my family, with my mom. And still at Columbia, if you feel unsafe, you can call the public safety to walk you back. And I think it's really important for students, especially international students, to know what kind of resources does the school have and you can use and how to use them.
Emerson, what are your thoughts about safety?
Well, I don't know if I can put it better than Lacey, but the one thing that I would add to that is if you're going to go out, make sure you go out with people that you trust. Know what you're getting into, because there's a lot of things. It's an open society in a lot of ways, and sometimes you might stumble across a campus party or something, and you don't really know who's hosting the party or what's going on. So it's always good to be with people that you trust, and don't be afraid to ask questions, things of that nature. I don't want to encourage underage drinking, but it does happen on campuses, and we need to be careful with that. Always know what you're ingesting in your body. That's important. And I guess the last thing I would say is that communicate with people, right? Communicate with your friends, and always let somebody know, where you're going, and always have somebody that you can check in with. Keep in touch with your family back here. Always call mom.
And Justin, on your campus there in New York, what do you have in place there?
So, obviously we have the same resources, right? We have public safety, we have campus security, we have, the walk you to your dorm, that whole thing. I agree with what Emerson said. When you go out, don't go out by yourself. Check in. There's certain safety protocols that you should always go through. You have somebody who knows where you're going. If you're going to a party, they know where you're going to be. I hate to sound like someone's parent, but tell your roommate when you're going to come home. And that way, if you don't come home, that at least they'll text you and be like, hey, where are you? That sort of thing. The other thing I'll say is if you're in New York City, and my partner lives in New York, so we sort of trade weekends, she will never check her phone when she's on the street by herself. She won't talk on the phone. She won't look at text, anything like that. And she was like, you have to have your head up all the time. Right. And it's a tiny little thing. It's very practical. You know, she doesn't carry a purse when she's on the street in New York. You know, she carries a backpack and not a purse, stuff like that. That's just like little tiny things that you can do that keep you from looking like you're a target. And I know with kids that you always want to be looking at your phone, but put your phone in your pocket, whatever it is can wait, you know, 10, 15 minutes until you get to where you're going.
And I think that brings me to my next question, which is, and if we look at the statistics right now with the violence and hate crimes against the Asian community in the United States, they're targeting the vulnerable. It's elderly people and it's women. And I of course want all of our boys to be just as safe, but I think there is an issue. You know, you mentioned your partner, Justin, and that's a she, and different strategies in place. And I think there's a bit of practicality to look at here, and to think about that we don't have to worry about in Beijing. I didn't have to worry about it when I lived in the Middle East, in the country where I was in. There just wasn't any crime. And in the United States, there is. And on top of that, there's another layer of vulnerability. And while we want the students to feel welcome and we want them to feel safe, we also want them to be aware, and especially those a bit more vulnerable. And so I'm curious about the strategies and how do we address these issues without scaring people? You know, we don't want people to be afraid, but we want them to be prepared. And what can we do now to make that happen? So let me ask you, Emerson, your thoughts on that.
Well, I think what we can do here in Beijing and preparing young people is giving young girls a place where they can feel as though they can exert themselves. So sports, I think, is a good way to help young people in general. But since we're talking about girls in particular here, in Chinese society traditionally, girls don't participate in sports as much as boys. And I've found that as girls get older, a lot of times they shy away from that type of activity, whereas boys tend to embrace it. And I know in my life, sports have helped me just to be a more confident person, just to feel athletic and to feel that if I need to run or get away, that I can do it. So I think empowering girls with that can be very helpful. We tried to do that at Beijing 119. We made sports mandatory. So not only do they have a regular PE class, but we try to also introduce them to different types of sports, including American football. So we play American football with our girls, and more than you might think, end up enjoying it. So just creating an environment where people can feel confident, I think helps.
Great. What about you in particular, Lacey, in the US? Did you have some sort of strategies? Did you have a toolkit about checking your safety when you got there?
I don't really have a toolkit, but for me, I'll always go out with my friends. Sometimes we're like girls' night, I'll still call one or two boys to stay with us, because I think because in New York at night it's really dangerous, and I personally have an experience like around Cape Town and during midnight, and someone will come to you and try to talk to you, and that's kind of scary. And after that, every time I go out, I'll ask my friend to stay with me, and I'll walk her back, and she will watch me to like take the Uber and go back. Thanks.
And I think someone brought it up earlier, I think maybe it was Justin, it depends on where you are in the United States. When I travel around China, I kind of feel the same level of safety. I speak the same amount of Chinese, so I have the same problems I have trying to communicate wherever I go. And it feels, wherever I go, I still feel that I'm okay. In the United States, you can be in one city and walk down the street, and this is a lovely place, and literally you cross the street, and suddenly you realize I'm in a really bad place, and I don't know what to do. And I'm not sure how to prepare for that when you're trying to explain that to someone. And because I've had students come back and visit, and they've told me this story, and not feeling comfortable and not feeling safe. So then they'll just kind of isolate and stay on their campus. And I'm wondering, Justin, in the US, when the students come from abroad, do they orientate then as far as what the city has to offer, the places to go around them, and the places not to go?
We do have a first year orientation. It's a week at the beginning, and then there's, various programs throughout the entirety of the first year. And one of the things that our Dean of First Years does is she takes them through a walking tour of Poughkeepsie. And so they literally walk from the campus to downtown Poughkeepsie through some of the neighborhoods and back, so they get a feel for the town by foot, which I think she started doing this maybe 2 years ago. It's a fantastic way to introduce students to the city. I think every single international student that I've had in the last 6 or 7 years has a friend from high school who went to either Columbia or NYU. And so when they take the train from here down to New York City, they're always meeting up with a friend who either already knows uptown or already knows downtown. And so that actually helps out a great deal. And it's interesting because it becomes sort of like a self-perpetuating mechanism, where then somebody else comes from somewhere else in China and they'll be like, oh, why don't you get together with my friend who's at NYU? And then they'll take the train down. And so there is a bit of a circuit between Vassar, the New York schools, and then Penn in Philadelphia. There's like a circuit of students from China, Korea, England, and Brazil that all sort of make these journeys between Poughkeepsie, New York, and Philadelphia, which is it's very sweet to see the students sort of learn about America through their friends who are at different institutions.
That's great, and I would imagine that the Chinese students are appalled by the infrastructure in the United States.
One of my students came back, I think it was in January of his first year, and he was like, man, why are American trains so bad? He took the subway and he was like, I felt like it was going to fall apart.
Yeah, it's 100 years old. And so that's another thing to think about. So not only are you a fish out of water, things don't work very well like they do in China. And so I'm going to have to ask Lacey, what are some reactions you had in those circumstances?
I would say just take it. You're gonna stay here for a while. You can't do anything besides just take it. And I know a lot of Chinese students who don't live in New York start to have their own car when they get to the States. And I think that's another way to make yourself feel safe and to avoid taking trains.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on, the the United States is great in a lot of ways, but our development and focus on infrastructure, it just has been non-existent for generations at this stage. And hopefully that will improve. But I mean, you transitioned to China and noticed this difference. So can you speak to that, Emerson?
Sure. Yeah. I would say that coming to China, coming to a place like Beijing, I've been here a long time. I was here during the Olympics in 2008. So I've seen China develop, and actually that's one of the things that has fascinated me so much about China is you're always learning something. Every day you're learning something, you're seeing something new come up, and it's fascinating to watch a city grow. So much has happened since 2008. So many subway lines are being put up, and it's nice. The subway's clean and convenient. You see clean streets. You see e-buses, and it's phenomenal. And when I go back to states, particularly to places like New York, it does make you think. What's going on? Especially you go down to Wall Street, and the roads downtown there are horrible. Potholes everywhere. You figure with all this money and all this finance that they would do something, at least in that area, so we don't have to drive over potholes. But you do. I encourage students to just understand why things are that way. Try to understand your socioeconomic paradigm. What do I mean by that? What is the society that you live in? And what is the society like where you're going? And why is it that? Use the critical thinking skills you have and use it as a learning experience. Right? Try to connect the dots and make sense of it. The infrastructure is bad in the US in some ways, but it's great in a lot of other ways. And I'm sure, they see, and those of you who haven't gone to the US yet, you're going to see ways in which life in America is more convenient than life here. So try to understand both sides of it. And that's really what your job is as a scholar, right? To try to understand the world and your place in it, right? And to ask those critical thinking questions, not just what this is, but how this is and why this is. And if you can do those things, you're just going to be a stronger, more informed global citizen.
And I think, there's a lot to unpack in this conversation. Just culture shock in and of itself is complex. I think all of us on this panel have experienced this and the many levels to that. Add to that the current climate of racism. Add to that targeted racism specifically towards Chinese citizens or those that might be perceived as being Chinese. Add to that a crumbling infrastructure and just a changing world, a very, very rapidly changing world. And I think we here in China, working in international education, very much have a responsibility, very much have a duty to prepare the students, not just to do well in their studies and their academics, but on a more holistic level, to integrate, to be able to be aware of their environment, to be aware of the history of the context in which they're going to enter, which could be varied depending on where they go in the United States, and to have those communication skills, to be able to develop those networks and to have those communities, someone to look out for you, not to be isolated. I think those are all really important points that we've brought up here today in this discussion. What I'd like to do now is maybe open it up for some questions that you might have and suggestions as well as part of the Chinese community for us in the international community to support you better. So if anyone has questions. Yes.
So thank you very much for your elaboration on these very significant issues. I just have a question. You either being in the role of a student or educator, you know about the, according to your knowledge about American school education, Chinese school education, I think we all agree that it's very important to foster students cross-cultural communication competences that they can be well equipped or well prepared for any challenge or problem that they might face, either racism related or not, in the future. I believe, as Emerson said, communication is central to all these issues, and all these bad experiences or the traumatic experiences are always related to the breakdown of communication. So cross-cultural communication counts. But in your knowledge of both American school education, Chinese school education, do you think, how do you see the parts of the education on cross-cultural communication? Do you think in what aspects that Chinese school education has been doing very well, or in what aspects that American school education has been doing very well in terms of, there are a lot of terms about this now, like cross-cultural communication or global competencies or global citizenship, whatever. So can you share your experience or viewpoints about how we can learn from each other? I mean, either Chinese school education system learn from American ones or the other way around. That's my question.
Okay, great. I think that's a great question. What I would say is that for us in China, preparing students to go abroad, it's very important to have a robust international exchange program in some way. So for example, at 101 ID, we've had historically sister schools in the United States and other places abroad. And what we do with that school is important, because what we want to do is we want to provide experiences for our students and their students to come together and to understand each other and to do it in the other, their counterparts' environment. So in the pre-COVID days, we had a very robust physical exchange. One of our sister schools is in Norfolk, Virginia, a private school in Norfolk, Virginia. And we would go there every spring festival time. We would send about 15 students there. And before we visited the school, we would do university tours. And then we would have host family stays where our students would stay for 2 or 3 weeks with an American counterpart and go to school and attend classes and sports with their host family. And this would happen in their 10th grade. And when they came back from these trips, they just learned so much. It's amazing how much a young person can learn in 2 weeks, staying with another young person from another place in the world. And it was just a beautiful experience. And the best part about it was that in June, while we were still in session, but they had finished for the school year, those same students would come here and stay with our families. And we would attend our classes and our sporting events. And the best part about it, because I was in charge of running this exchange, was just watching the kids take over, which alludes to what Justin was saying before, that these young people have so much more in common than we would think. My generation of Americans, I had some things in common with my counterparts in China, but these young kids today, they do so much of the same thing. They play the same video games, they listen to the same music, they eat the same food, for better or worse. But they have that in common. And if we can break down those barriers and allow them to go back and forth, they're going to learn so much. And when they go abroad, eventually, having that experience is going to be so much value for them. So I strongly encourage international departments to have those types of robust exchanges. And use the COVID, and here's the thing, use the COVID era to your advantage. So now, because of COVID, so many schools are connected online and set up to have online exchanges. And while these online exchanges aren't as fruitful as these personal exchanges, you can use them for the future. So right now, maybe we have 4 or 5 sister schools instead of just 1 or 2. And when things start to open up and people are able to travel again more freely, then we have even more partners around the world. So yes, COVID was a horrible thing, but I think now that we're online and using Zoom, it's become such second nature to us. I think we can use that to our advantage. And this is the best type of cross-cultural exchange you can have, really having these robust international exchange programs.
Thank you. Justin, what are your thoughts from the United States perspective on this question?
About having cultural exchange?
Well, and just really different. I mean, we look at the international way of teaching and the Western way of teaching and learning versus the Chinese way. We all know those are very different. And how can we maximize all of that knowledge for our students?
I will say this. So when I taught in China, and this was in 2002, the high school students I had amassed an incredible amount of just straight factual knowledge, right? Their grasp of history and literature from a factual standpoint was quite robust. And it was something that I wish some of my American students had, because they just don't have a grasp of a ton of root material with which to think critically. And so there's some things that I look at with the Chinese educational system that I wish the American system would do more of. And then the flip is always, American students, as soon as you ask them, well, what do you think about this? They always have an answer, right? Whereas some of my international students are a little thrown off because they've never been asked, what is your opinion? What's your take on this? What's your read on this? That sort of thing. And I think that short-term, I will agree with Emerson, short-term exchange is really, really a fruitful way to look at this, because it makes my American students realize that they have not memorized as much information as I would like them to in order for them to make any sort of theoretical claim. And I think with my international students, I would like them to get to campus a little more used to thinking critically, used to saying, okay, here's a whole bunch of facts that I know. Now let me give you an interpretation of what I think this is. And so I think there's a way to introduce both of these and to sort of see if we can find a way to get the best of both worlds, where you can do research and be factually rigorous and really have a grasp on evidence, but also be intellectually free to be critical and to think of new ways of thinking about things and to read against the grain and to be somewhat futuristic in how you project the meaning of things into the future. I know it's a tall order.
Yeah, it's a tall order. And I have a question for Lacey, because as a Chinese student who has already experienced this, exactly what we're discussing today, what do you wish you could have had in your transition to the United States that maybe we as educators can provide for our students now?
I would say, I'm reminding myself of my freshman year. I would say maybe some emotional support from maybe high school teachers or even high school friends. I think for me, because I was from the international department and all my friends are also freshmen, are also struggling with the new environment. And at that time, I always want to find someone to talk about how things is here now is so different was what I expected. But my parents cannot really totally understand me for this part, and all my friends are busy with their lives. And I think if I had our high school teachers were something like a Zoom session to talk about this, what we can.
That's great advice that we can all take with us. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. So I actually want to add something to Emerson's points because I was personally a part of the local exchange program, and it was that trip that actually told me that do not be afraid. Because when I was there, I actually felt that to what extent the United States is actually a melting pot. And it's really special for me because my exchange partner, she was born in China and she was adopted by a single mother in the United States. So that her admiration towards Chinese culture and how she lives as a true American, it actually helps me. It makes me feel that although the world is very different in different places, but it's those differences that makes it possible for us to feel some similarities with the people across the ocean. And I think that's a really special characteristic that we can see in the United States. And it personally helped me to not be that afraid.
Thank you for that.
Well, no matter who you are or where you're from, there's somebody who's an American who looks just like you, right? I forget how many thousands of languages are spoken in the world, and there's a native speaker of 2/3 of them in New York City. Quite literally, there is somebody who looks like everybody in the world who lives in America. So you can be an American. I mean, I'm a grandchild of Chinese immigrants, and my brother now represents the Chinese government, the American government in China as a diplomat, right? This is what happens in America. So it's sort of like, if you want to belong, you can belong.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with another question. So as a junior student who's going to apply and attend an U.S. college next year, I'm really curious about if there are any suggestions that the panel have for us that we can currently do to, on a personal level to reduce this racial tension issue, even just to a small extent, as for now, because just now you have talked extensively about what the school is currently providing for students to, make this transition and adjustment easier. But is there anything else that we can do on a more social movement level that we can participate in? Because I personally am very active on Instagram, and I spend at least 3 hours on it every day. Shame on me. But I see these hashtags Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate very frequently promoted by celebrities and other influencers. And I wonder, do you think these social movements on social media or in other, social sectors helpful? for us to like reduce this severe racial tension that is, currently a hotspot issue, and should we take part and participate in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another great question. In terms of what you can do personally, I'm going to leave that to Lacey to answer, but I'll answer the second part of your question about should you participate in those types of things online. I would advise you, if you're interested in something and you find a draw to it, you find relevance to it, to explore it, but to be careful. Because you really need to know what you're getting into when you do things online. You really need to try to understand what's behind it. Like what is the real motivation? And those hashtags, they're valuable. Those are things that are important, right? We do need to stop Asian hate. Black lives do matter. All of those things are of the day. All of those things are movements that you should be aware of. But always be careful of who's sending messages, who's inviting you to something. My advice to you would be to explore, but don't get too involved in something that you really don't know that much about. So do as much as you can to educate yourself and ask questions of people you trust, okay? Like your teachers. Right? You can go upstairs and you can ask your teachers. Emerson, I came across this particular hashtag. I came across this website. What do you think about it? Right? And then I can talk to you freely about it, give you the best advice that I can give. But yeah, always be careful with your online presence because you never know what's going to come back to you in some way. You might type something and be taken out of context. Someone takes a screenshot of something that you put online, and then they send it to somebody. They send it to the dean of the school where you're attending and say, look what this person said in 2020. Right? And, that can come back to hurt you. So, I'm older. I am a little bit more wary of getting involved in those types of things online. But like I said, talk to somebody you trust, make sure that it's a reliable and trustworthy site, and always find ways to protect yourself. That's the most important. Because it's an ugly world out there, it's a beautiful world out there, but there are some bad actors who will use things and try to manipulate.
I think I can share my experience with my college application with you guys. At the beginning, I was very struggle. I don't know what I really want from the college, and I don't know which college I want to apply for. And what my college counselor told me is to do a lot of school research. And while you're doing the school research, you get to know each school and you feel the difference between them. And then you start to realize what do you value the most. And you can start to prioritize what you want from the college. Like for me, at that time, I want a small size class and I want to focus more on academic and I want to stay away from city. So I chose Wesleyan, and I really love Wesleyan when I get there, and I feel like I would belong there. But later I find out that my academic interest was not pure math, and I started to want to do some real application of math and engineering. So I found out the combined plan program was Columbia, and then I transferred to Columbia. I'll say where the college application part is very important. You need to figure out what you really want, and like for now, you can also take the safety part as your when you're doing the school research. But this is not the only chance, and you can still figure out what you really want, and you can also transfer.
Well, I just want to share my observation, which is a comment. I really appreciate you this seminar and your effort of bridging the gap of understanding. I think that's the real cause of all this discrimination or attack on Asian or Chinese in the United States. Just my personal feeling, I'm not sure it's right or wrong. Both China and the United States have the culture of tolerance. The United States is the great nation, I think, but it's partly because it can accommodate a great variety of culture and people from a great variety of cultures. And so what happens right now to Asian or Chinese is totally inconsistent with that kind of value. Well, partly because that's related because you're all educators, although that's beyond your abilities relating to school education in the United States, not here. Because I'm not sure about the curriculum in the United States. If the students at a young age could be taught more about the cultures and learn to appreciate cultures of other parts of the world, probably there will be less probability of the occurrence of that kind of discrimination or attack on Asian or Chinese. I think probably that's the deep-rooted cause, although I can do nothing about it, and you probably also could believe about that. You have made maximum efforts by organizing, presenting at this seminar. I do appreciate that. Being a parent, though, that's my comment. Thank you very much.
You bring up an excellent point, because it almost sounds a little bit hypocritical as an American to be, here on this sort of safe side of things, and wanting to build those bridges. And sincerely, I think we all do that. Just this past week in Texas, a bill was passed that it is no longer allowed to even speak of racism in a classroom in a public school. And this to me is very, very shocking. And it's deeply upsetting because there is no way to build these bridges and to adapt to our changing world if we cannot start having these conversations with our young people in a safe academic setting. And to me, it's one of my goals personally is to return to the US and to get involved in policy and to ensure that those things do happen and take place safely and correctly and appropriately, not from a political viewpoint, but from a historical viewpoint. And that if we don't give the chance for people to be educated, we will never stamp out the intolerance that's happening now. And I really appreciate your question.
Just now, you mentioned the cultural exchange programs domestically in China, but I'm also interested in is there any other institutions or organizations in the United States, especially for the high school and the college? Are there any other special organizations that they are aiming to reach out to different cultures?
Maybe Justin can answer that. You're there.
So programs that do multicultural exchange. So the State Department does a certain amount of it. And there's, I wish I could pull it off the top of my head, but there are ways that they facilitate interchange. There are a bunch of organizations, like local organizations, when we think about like the OCA, the Organization of Chinese Americans, that does a lot of cross-cultural stuff, and they operate mostly in the large cities in the East and West Coast and then in the Midwest. There was a lot of what I would think about as local cultural programming. So there's some random cities in America that have sister cities in China. In fact, when I went to go teach for a year in China, it was done through a city in Wisconsin that has a sister city in Henan. So there's a lot of very local exchanges like that were done by local city and municipal governments. There's a bunch of cultural centers. Obviously, New York City is a different case because there's hundreds of cultural organizations that do programs that go everywhere from kindergarten programming up through, post-retirement, lifelong learning kinds of stuff. And it's one of those things that you have to kind of be in a place to know them. So like in Poughkeepsie, we have the Lifelong Learning Center. We have the Poughkeepsie Cultural Arts Council. There's the Dutchess County Arts Council that all do various types of cultural exchange, whether it's summer festivals facilitating interchange between Poughkeepsie High School students and students from elsewhere. So there's a lot of local stuff that happens that you're not likely to hear about unless you're there. Does that make sense?
I would add that particularly between the United States and China, in some ways these exchanges are one-sided because a lot of times it's Chinese kids going to the United States, and because many of them have the language skills, they can be thrown into an American classroom quite easily and get a very good sense of what it's like to be a student in the United States in those classrooms. In my experience, having American kids come here, a lot of times the vast majority of them will not be able to speak Chinese or have a very, very limited Chinese, and in a way kind of have to be babied through the process. And I had to create certain classes just for these students to be able to understand what's going on. And again, English has to be used. So I think that's another area that I think the two countries need to work on. I think the importance of the Chinese language needs to be disseminated around the world, but in the United States in particular, I would really like to see more US public schools adopting and taking in Mandarin as a language of instruction. I think that's very important.
Yeah. The only places where you can get bilingual Chinese instruction from when you're little are basically like New York, San Francisco, and LA. Those are the only three places where, like, my cousins in San Francisco, their kids go to bilingual school when they're little, but it's San Francisco. It is an anomaly in the US. We are a very monolingual culture.
I think something important to remember for Chinese students going to the US, please seek out American friends. Don't expect them to understand you. We are very much, because the United States is geographically isolated, and many Americans don't have passports, they've not traveled, and within that geographical space, it's so diverse already. And there's so many microcultures just within one state. And to grasp Chinese culture is very, very difficult for Americans. And I would advise students transferring there to definitely reach out and share, but it's not personal when an American student has no idea of your culture or what you're talking about. And I would hope through time and as America becomes even more diverse, and that through these student exchanges and these cultural exchanges, that will improve over time. And that will, of course, alleviate the racism that's happening now.
So actually, I have a problem about racism and safety. Actually, I lived in Sweden when I was in primary school, and I lived there for 3 years. And during that time, I was discriminated and got bullied. So actually, that greatly damaged my self-esteem and confidence. And nowadays, we're hearing a lot about like biased news about America, and that people there are discriminating Asian people. So actually, how should we deal with this? And like, are there any ways to relieve my like psychological mind?
Okay, well, let me say something. If something comes to mind, you can jump in. Yeah, first of all, to have that experience, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's terrible. That's terrible. And when you have an experience like that, it's like you said, it's very scarring. Like even to this day, it still bothers you, and you're thinking about it because in a few short years you're going to be going abroad. And I'm going to be frank with you. You're probably going to experience something like that again. It might happen again. But I will also encourage you by telling you that most people aren't going to see you as different. As my colleagues have said today, America really is a melting pot in many ways. Most people, when they see you walking down the street, they're going to think, oh, that's just another dude. They're not even going to necessarily know you're from China. You could just be from any place. You could be from Florida, you could be from Miami, you could be from LA, you could have been born in America. They're not necessarily thinking of you as a Chinese person. Now, you're going to be thinking of yourself as a Chinese. You're going to be conscious of that. But a lot of times that's really just you. And most people really won't care. And in the classroom setting, if it comes up, most people are going to be interested in who you are and where you come from. And they're going to want to know more about that. So the best advice I can give you is be prepared for some of that, but also be encouraged that that's not going to be as commonplace as you probably think. And we've all had some experience like that. And as a young person, that stays with you. So your experience in Sweden, that stays with you to this day. But believe me, it won't be that bad. It's not going to always be like that. And the vast majority of your experiences with different people are going to be good experiences.
So I would say, and I'll be a little bit philosophical here, is that your purpose is more important than your person. And so if you live your purpose with purpose, then a lot of these other little things don't actually matter all that much. So if you come to the States and you go to college, your purpose is to get educated. Your purpose is to make yourself the best version of yourself. And so if you live with that purpose, sometimes these little things, they don't matter because they don't actually affect how you live with your purpose. And I think that one of the things that I tell my students is if you didn't earn a place at Vassar, you wouldn't be here. So whatever feelings you have about, inadequacy or not fitting in, those are on the surface because you got here because you worked to get here. And your purpose here is to improve yourself the best that you can in these 4 years. And you have to remember that if you live with purpose, some of these other things don't really matter as much. Or in fact, some of them don't matter at all.
Okay. If no more questions, I want to take advantage of the chance and ask a few questions to today's panelists, because today's discussion for me is very, very inspiring. This one is actually the fourth thematic panel is under the same in the past 3 months. This is the fourth one already. And the uniqueness of this one is that we have these two international educators in China to share their experience and insights. My first question actually has been kind of answered by Angela as a response to the lady's comments, because in my mind, people like you and Emerson have great value, or you are invaluable to promote the concept or the value of globalization, because you have been working, you are like an international worker and working in another country in a long term. And for example, you are staying in the capital of the second largest economy, or already first largest economy, and then teaching in a very prestigious high school, facing and getting along with the most elite Chinese students. So you have a mindset about the future of this country. And also you grow up and educated in the United States, and you understand there too. So you are actually can be the best bridge to promote about that understanding. And Angela, if I don't misunderstand, you mentioned you plan to go back and then really be the advocate for the policy and people to understand each other. So that's actually answered my first question. And my second question is that how hard you think to change the mindset or people's view, the negative view towards China. I mean, I don't know how this anti-China rhetoric or narrative about deteriorating, maybe by Trump administration, or maybe by the pandemic, or maybe by some long-lasting reasons. But it seems very hard to change it. Some disturbing news or knowledge for me is that I read a survey led by the School of Social Work of Columbia University among the 400 Chinese American who is already American for a long time, lived in New York City. And almost 80% of them feel that it's very hard to change this trajectory of people's mind, negative mind toward China, the country, and the people from there. And also, they share that they feel, I forgot that word, on the tenderness or on the tender food, meaning that they are very vigilant about any bad thing happening maybe next minutes. So that's why we changed the same, originally written as the standing stay vigilant and standing solidarity. And the faculty member who is a partner of this thematic series suggested do not use that word vigilant, because we're so tired of being vigilant every day. That's the reality here we have to face, and we are so sad about that. So I just want to hear your opinion about how hard you think to change that view, and what would you suggest policymakers to do, and people like us? I think this one of the students mentioned that she kind of like interested to join the social movement. I understand your suggestion, asking her being cautious. But on the other hand, would you suggest the students like them to join to share their voice, to voice their concern or their opinion regarding this issue, and try to shift the trend of this voice, and helping reshape the mindset or relationship with the country. That's a very complex question, maybe, but any opinion, any thoughts shared would be appreciated.
Well, I'll jump in and share a few ideas that I have. I think one of the things to consider, changing people's mindsets, that's a very difficult thing. But one of the things that I'm very passionate about is the relationship between the two countries, China and the United States. And the understanding that we have of each other. I think one of the areas where China could do more is by really pushing their soft power a little bit more. Because I think there are so many beautiful and amazing things about China and Chinese culture that people just abroad, people in America have a very, very superficial understanding of. And because of that, you don't fall in love with the place from afar. The images that we see on TV, a lot of times they're negative. Yeah. And, you know, it's easy for me to say that because I'm here and I've fallen in love with this country. It's become my second home. So I want nothing more than to see China become a more influential country with its culture, because there's just so much to learn. I mean, basic things like Chinese traditional medicine, Chinese traditional music, but even modern film, modern Chinese film, and modern Chinese television are really interesting. Sometimes I'll turn on CCTV and I'll see some really interesting shows. What's going on here? And I want to know more, you know? And then I'll say to my wife, I'll say, they should have English subtitles. Because I really think that people would fall in love with it and really want to watch it. But we don't get it. And there's some kind of disconnect when it comes to China pushing soft power. Because American soft power is everything, right? And that's one of the greatest strengths of America, is its soft power. And that's been going on for a century, for decades. You know, Michael Jackson in Japan, you know, things like that. You know, these kids here, they know all about it. They're the ones who teach me about American culture. Oh, yeah, I didn't know who she was, but they know. And I think China has so much to offer. And I think that is one area that would help to change people's mindset. Because when you fall in love with a place, when you fall in love with the culture, you're going to embrace the people more. And I think Chinese students, it's incumbent upon them to do that, and to share in class. And this is what I always say: when you go abroad and you're sitting in a classroom, don't be hesitant to share what you know. People are going to be interested. And that's something that a lot of early Chinese to Americans failed to do. I've met older Chinese people who they don't speak the language, even though they understand it because their parents speak it at home. They don't speak it because we don't want to speak Chinese outside of the house because we're afraid of what other people are going to think about us. And once that happens, once you begin to close yourself off and not to express yourself and to show your culture, it gets lost, and other people don't have the ability to truly understand it and embrace it. So I'll end there by saying I think it's the promotion of soft power.
Yeah, I will 100% agree with that, Emerson. I also think that, you know, the end of this sort of animosity happens one small gesture at a time. And so actually, I think that the number of Chinese students who have come to Vassar has been a good thing for the town of Poughkeepsie. I mean, there's not a ton of Asians out here. It is a very, you know, black and white town. And I think it makes a difference just seeing, you know, a lot of Chinese folks on the street up here changes people's minds. And it changes the way you think of somebody when they're your neighbor and no longer an abstract expression. And so I think that these exchanges, whether they are student exchanges or whether they're, you know, high school or college or whatever, become very important because it gives people an opportunity to actually know somebody as a person rather than as a rhetorical figure. And so the more exchange we have in terms of, you know, folks from China coming here, folks from America going there, that helps to change the way we think about these things.
The soft power idea is very good, but I think something really important to remember. When you go abroad as a young person, you're no longer just yourself. You're an ambassador for your country. You have an opportunity to educate people about things they don't know about. And this is a philosophy I also take for myself, because I've lived abroad for many years. And I understand that when the community I'm in sees me, they don't just see me, they see my entire country and my culture. And I try to present that well, and bridge that gap. And I think, to answer your question, to have progress in this issue, it's going to take a generation. It's a very slow progress. What we see happening in the United States is that the majority is becoming the minority. And that's being replaced by a lot of this wonderful diversity. And I think there's fear in that. And I think a lot of racism is the result of people being afraid that once they're the minority, they're going to be treated the way they see minorities treated today. And I think through a generation that shift can take place. And what we'll all learn, and I'm very optimistic, is that we're all human beings. And once we understand each other better, the world is better. And our young people today, Chinese students going to the United States, are carrying the burden of this time period. And being aware of that is, I think, extremely important.
Thank you so much. I think the suggestion from Emerson about promoting soft power and also Angela encouraging the young generation to carry the responsibility to promote the cultural understanding are definitely right on the target of this essence of this issue or questions. Thank you. And I think I totally understand this issue, which already lasts for centuries, will take generations to improve also. But seeing things happen like this, like today, having this conversation, inviting the international educator to come here and share your insights, everything you said, probably I've already heard it in Chinese from some Chinese people, but it's all like from you. This inspiration is totally different in my mind. So this is very, very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Has anyone have any comments or questions to add?
Since I studied in America when I was grade 9, and I would just like to say sometimes when, because I went to America someday, and sometimes when you just keep all these race relationships in mind all the time, it just makes things even more complicated. Just when you someday when you are really there, just will everyone and say person, you are all just like person, like homo sapien and nothing else. And I feel this will also help everyone have a better relationship with each other.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Part of this is not just to ask questions, but to share your feelings. And thank you for sharing your feelings, because it's important. When you express yourself and you let other people know how you feel, then people are going to understand you more. And that's really what it's all about. That we need to be there for each other, we need to support each other. That it's all about being part of a community. So, on that note, I just want to remind you that all of you, all the young people who are in these types of international departments, you have people who will support you. You have people who are going to look after you and keep those relationships. Lacey said that she needed to talk to her teachers because there were certain things that she couldn't say to her parents because her experience with her parents is completely different. Right? So you have foreign teachers, go and talk to them. Right? Angela mentioned that at your school you have teachers from 21 different places in the world, 21 different countries. That's phenomenal, right? And that's important. International departments need to have diverse faculties. Embrace that type of diversity and always understand that those teachers, they're going to help you, right? Lacey graduated in 2016. But if she needs me, she can still contact me anytime. Right? So build those connections. Always let people know how you feel. That's very important. Right? We're all here for each other.
And I would like to just, obviously if you're in this room, you're thinking about studying abroad. And I would just say, my year spent living in China was one of the most meaningful years of my life. My brother, he had studied in Nanjing and Beijing, and then has lived in Shanghai and Shenyang. And he said, there's nothing like spending time outside of your home country, right? Like, I would really encourage you guys to make it a priority, not just to visit, but to actually put down stakes and live somewhere, even if it's only for a year, just for that experience. I cannot emphasize how transformative that experience is. And obviously the other three panelists here will tell you the exact same thing.
Thank you so much. I will invite the panelists to the audience now.
Okay, thank you again for the incredible informative panel and sharing, especially to Justin. It is very, very late. Hopefully we will be able to receive you Beijing in the near future. For many Chinese students, I just want to add, suddenly becoming Asian minority in the society is definitely a lot to process. Students have shared with me at Columbia about their concern, their desire to support the broader community, and they are quite worried about returning to the American society, which has already changed a lot compared with the pre-pandemic world. And the parents also, fortunately, the parents across the Columbia University have responded to the call for action. The public safety is offering personal safety training, as mentioned by our panelists just now, and University Health and Medicine Center are offering supporting group, and the Global Center and the ISSO continue to provide opportunity to engage in important dialogue and provide support like today's. So these are but a few of many examples of support here at Columbia. Of course, it is important to keep in mind that every international student have his or her own unique journey and a story. So sometimes you just have to tell yourself this is a common experience everyone needs to experience as a grown-up. So just give yourself the pep talk and being prepared for the new future. I hope that the main takeaway today will be the necessity for the good preparation to deal with the sense of racial sensitivity, as well as the resources that you can turn to when you need, which is also the the original intention of designing of this fourth panels under this same. So thank you for joining again, and look forward to seeing you in the upcoming events at the center, and have a good one. Thank you again. Thank you.